On August 23, 2021, India launched the Asset Monetisation Pipeline of federal ministries and public sector entities on National Monetisation Pipeline (Nmp Volume 1 and Volume 2). This scheme aims to monetize core assets under the central government to the tune of Rs 6,000 billion or $81 billion over a period of 4 years from FY 2022 to 2025, conterminous with the National Infrastructure Pipeline. The pipeline is envisaged as a holistic approach, which not only serves as an infrastructure funding mechanism but is aimed at bringing an overall paradigm shift in infrastructure operations, augmentation, and maintenance by leveraging resource efficiencies of the private sector and adapting to global best practices. The NMP's two-volume roadmap has been formulated by the government's policy think tank Niti Aayog in consultation with infrastructure line ministries to fulfill the asset monetization mandate of the government as proposed in the federal budget 2021 to 22. The government has clarified that while the rights will be transferred to private players, the ownership will be retained by the government. The NMP is a new scheme to establish structured, contractual partnerships between the government and the private players and thereby generate sustainable infrastructure funding by monetizing core brownfield infrastructural assets, that is, assets where operational infrastructure has already been built. The scheme will enable infrastructure creation through mutually beneficial collaboration between the public and private sectors, each of whom excel in their respective areas of competence and deliver on the government's socio-economic growth promises. The NMP does not include monetization proposals through disinvestment or through programs linked to non-core assets. For the purpose of monetization, core assets refer to those assets that are central to the business objectives of a public entity or a statutory government body and are being utilized for delivering infrastructure services to the public and users at large. The Nmp Roadmap identifies 13 crore sectors under which assets are to be monetized. These identified assets will be leased out to the private sector on a long-term basis. It is being reported that the lease will be applicable for 4 to 5 decades. The NMP has laid down the conceptual approaches and potential models for asset monetization, including the public-private partnership or PPP model. While the pipeline currently includes only assets under central government line ministries and central public sector enterprises or CPSEs, in infrastructure sectors, the process to coordinate the asset pipeline of respective Indian states is simultaneously ongoing. How will the National Monetisation Pipeline be implemented? The assets and transactions will be backed by various direct contractual and capital market instruments subject to parameters like sector, nature of assets, timing of transactions, etc. Suitable policy and regulatory interventions will be made on an as-needed basis. Work is underway to set up an asset monetization dashboard for real-time monitoring. The Empowered Committee has been constituted by the government to implement and monitor the program. The core group of secretaries on asset monetization or CGAM will be headed by the Cabinet Secretary. Now, how is the valuation of these assets derived under NMP? For each of these sectors, the NMP has been drawn for potential assets to be put up for monetization based on 3 key sets of information. 1. Potential asset value. Number 2. Asset consideration for monetization. And number 3. Indicative monetization value. Now, the indicative monetization value can be estimated by following various approaches, such as market approach. Under this approach, the indicative value is determined based on the comparable market transactions for the identified asset classes. Kpix Approach. This approach is considered for those asset classes that may be monetized through PPP-based models, expecting capital expenditure investment by the private sector. In such cases, substantial capital expenditure towards augmentation of infrastructure delivery is expected over the transaction life. The principle under the Kpix approach is that in the absence of the asset monetization transaction, the public asset owner, that is the government, would have to incur the outlay towards augmentation of the brownfield asset. Book value approach or BV approach. This approach is employed in case of asset classes where information on comparable market transactions or estimated Kpix investment is not available. Enterprise value approach or EV approach. This approach is considered for assets where information on the existing revenue stream is available or can be reasonably projected either on the basis of assumptions or the available data on prevailing tariff for an asset or asset class. Sector-wise breakdown of the asset monetization program. Roads, railways and power sector assets will comprise over 66% of the total indicative value of the potential assets to be monetized, and sectors like telecom, aviation, etc. will comprise the remaining share. Here is a sector-wise breakdown of the National Monetization Pipeline. Roads. Road assets aggregating to 26,700 kilometers comprising 22% of national highways or NHs will be considered for monetization over the next 4 years. The indicative monetization value will be estimated using the market approach. The government is expecting to invite 1,600 billion rupees or 21.55 billion US dollars by monetizing these road assets through potential models like toll operate transfer or TOT and infrastructure investment trust or INVIT. Railways. The railway sector will monetize assets having an indicative value of INR 1,525 billion over the next 4 years. The key rail assets identified for monetization include 400 railway stations, 90 passenger trains, one route of 1,400 km railway track, 741 km of Konkan Railway, 15 railway stadiums and selected railway colonies, 265 railways owned goods sheds and 4 hill railways. While this indicative monetization value will be estimated based on the Kpix approach for railway stations, passenger trains, railway colonies and private freight terminals, the book value approach will be adopted for estimating the monetized value of track infrastructure. Power transmission. The government intends to invite investments worth 452 billion rupees or 6.12 billion US dollars by monetizing assets under this sector, and the market approach will be employed while estimating the indicative monetized value of these assets. The transmission assets that will be considered for monetizing over the next 4 years aggregate to 28,608 circuit kilometers, including transmission assets of 400 kV or kV and above of the Power Grid Corporation of India Limited or PGCIL. Power generation. An asset based of 6 gigawatt fetching a value of 398 billion rupees or 5.400 billion US dollars will be considered for monetization under Nmp. This valuation has been done using the book value approach. Key entities whose assets have been considered are National Hydroelectric Power Corporation or NHPC, National Thermal Power Corporation Limited or NTPC, and Sutlej Jal Vidyut Nigam Limited or SGVNL, who own bulk of the hydel assets, and NTPC and Neyveli Lignite Corporation Limited or NLC that own renewable assets.